My parents gave away my college fund to my cousin without asking, so I exposed her lies. And watched them lose the perfect daughter they idolized. I remember by the time I was 12, I'd already lost count of how many schools I'd been to. Every time we moved, I tried to get excited about the new place, but in the back of my mind, I always knew it wouldn't last. That's just how things were. My sister, who was a year older than me, seemed to handle it better than I did. She was one of those people who could make friends anywhere, no problem. Meanwhile, I felt like I was always struggling to find my place. It wasn't easy being the new kid all the time. But finally, when I was 12 and she was 13, we moved to what would eventually become our permanent home. It was the first time my parents actually said, "This is it. We're staying here for good." I don't think I believed it at first, but over time, I realized they were serious. No more moving. No more packing up every year. It was a huge relief, honestly. I had never had a hometown, but now I was finally going to have one. The place we moved to wasn't anything fancy, just a quiet neighborhood with houses that looked pretty similar to one another. But it felt like a fresh start in a way that the other moves didn't. This time, I knew I could finally start making friends without worrying about losing them in 6 months. We had barely unpacked when we found out that my cousin lived right next door. She was my sister's age, and they hit it off immediately. Honestly, it was like they were meant to be best friends. They started hanging out every day after school, and soon enough, they were inseparable. It was nice to see my sister so happy, and I guess it helped that she had a familiar face nearby. Moving was always tough, but having our cousin around made it easier for her. For me, though, it was a bit different. I wasn't jealous of their friendship, not really, but it was kind of weird being the third wheel. My cousin was cool, don't get me wrong, but it's like they had their own little world, and I just didn't fit into it. Most of the time, they were into things I wasn't, and that was fine. I wasn't exactly the girliest girl anyway. While they talked about clothes and music, I was more into sports and hanging out with the guys at school. But even though I wasn't part of their little duo, I was still happy that my sister had someone close. The neighborhood itself was quiet, and the people seemed nice enough. It wasn't a big community, but everyone knew each other. My parents made friends with the neighbors pretty quickly, which I guess helped them settle in too. After so many moves, it was nice to see them finally look relaxed, like they weren't waiting for the next job transfer that would take us somewhere else. For the first time in years, I started to feel like maybe things were going to be normal. School was different too. I was still the new kid, but this time, I didn't have to act like I was just passing through. I could actually try to make friends without that lingering thought in the back of my mind. What's the point? I'll be gone soon anyway. It made a huge difference. I remember walking to school with my sister and cousin almost every day. They would chat the whole time, laughing about something that had happened the day before, while I just trailed behind them, half listening and thinking about other things. It wasn't bad or anything. It was just the way things were. They had their thing, and I had mine. One day after school, my cousin and sister were sitting at the kitchen table, talking about the upcoming school dance or some other event that didn't really interest me. I was at the other end of the table, finishing up some homework, when my mom walked in and mentioned that this would be the first time we'd be in one place long enough to actually go to something like that. It kind of hit me then that this whole staying put thing was really happening. We were actually going to have experiences like normal kids, things like dances, after-school activities, and weekend hangouts that didn't get cut short by another move. That's when my cousin spoke up, inviting me to join them for the dance. I kind of brushed it off, saying it wasn't really my thing. They insisted, though, trying to convince me that it would be fun. And maybe it was because they genuinely wanted me to go with them, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just be a tag-along. It wasn't their fault. It's just how it felt. The truth is, I was always a bit on the outside, even in my own family. My sister and I were close, but after we settled down, it felt like she and my cousin had this bond that I wasn't really part of. I guess I didn't mind most of the time, but moments like that, when I was invited to join in, just made it more obvious that I wasn't really in their circle. I'd rather hang out with my guy friends or play sports than get dressed up for some school dance. But looking back, I think that's when things really started to shift in our family dynamic. My parents, who had always been focused on making sure we were settled in wherever we moved, now had a new focus. My sister and cousin's friendship became the center of attention, and I kind of drifted to the background. It wasn't a big deal at first, but over time, it started to feel like I was being left behind in more ways than one. I didn't know it at the time, but everything that happened next, our lives being turned upside down again, was already in motion. That sense of security I'd started to feel, it was about to be ripped away in a way I never saw coming. So after we settled in and life started to feel somewhat normal, things seemed pretty good for a while. My cousin and sister were thick as thieves. My parents were relaxed for the first time in what felt like forever. And even I was starting to feel like this whole staying in one place thing might actually be okay. But you know how sometimes life just throws stuff at you that you're never really ready for? That's exactly what happened to us. It wasn't long after we had finally settled down that my sister started to get sick. At first, it was just little things. She was more tired than usual, getting random fevers that didn't make sense, stuff like that. My parents thought maybe it was just her adjusting to a new school, or maybe she caught something from someone there. But after a while, it became clear that something was seriously wrong. She was missing more and more school, and the doctors couldn't seem to figure out what was going on. Then came the diagnosis: kidney cancer. Even now, typing those words feels unreal. I remember the day my parents sat me down and told me what it was. It didn't feel like real life, you know? Like stuff like this happens in movies or to other people, not to us. But there it was, staring us all in the face. My sister, my best friend, the one person who had always been there for me, was sick. Really sick. Everything changed after that. Our whole world flipped upside down. My parents were constantly at the hospital with her, and I was left at home with my cousin more often than not. I'd never felt more alone in my life. My cousin was there, but she was more focused on helping my parents than being there for me. Not that I blamed her. I mean, my sister was the one who needed all the help, not me. But still, it was hard. I didn't have my sister around to talk to, and now even my parents felt distant. My cousin stepped up in a way I'll always be grateful for, though. She really became the rock for my parents during that time. She was always there, helping with chores, running errands, making sure the house didn't fall apart while my parents were spending every waking moment at the hospital. She wasn't trying to replace my sister or anything, but she just, I don't know, she filled this gap that had suddenly opened up in our family. My parents leaned on her a lot during those months, and honestly, I think they needed her more than they realized. The whole situation with my sister's illness dragged on for what felt like forever: treatments, doctor visits, more hospital stays. It was a never-ending cycle of hope and heartbreak. One minute, we'd think she was getting better, and the next, she'd take a turn for the worse. And through it all, my cousin was there, always. Like, she practically lived at our house at that point. I remember one night when things were especially bad. My parents were at the hospital with my sister, and it was just me and my cousin at home. We were sitting at the kitchen table, and I guess I just couldn't hold it in anymore. I broke down. I didn't even know what I was feeling: anger, sadness, frustration, maybe all of it at once. My cousin just sat there, listening, letting me get it all out. She didn't say much, just reassured me that things would get better, even though deep down, I think we both knew that might not be true. It wasn't long after that night that my sister passed away. Everything after that is kind of a blur: the funeral, the quiet house, my parents barely functioning. It was like a part of us all died with her. My cousin was still there, though, doing her best to help my parents through it. She became more than just a family member at that point. She was basically a third daughter to them. I felt even more invisible during that time. It was like I was standing in the middle of a storm, but no one could see me. My parents were so deep in their grief that they barely acknowledged me, and my cousin had become their go-to for everything. I didn't resent her for it, but it was hard not to feel like I had been pushed to the side. She was filling a role that I didn't even know I had been left out of. As the weeks went on, my parents slowly started to function again, but things were never really the same. They relied on my cousin more and more for support, and honestly, I think they found comfort in her because she reminded them of my sister in a lot of ways. The bond they had with her just kept getting stronger, while I felt like I was drifting further away. I tried to focus on school and keeping myself busy, but it was hard when every time I came home, there was this constant reminder of what we'd lost. My cousin was always around, and it was like she had become part of the family in a way that I wasn't. I guess I didn't really know how to feel about it at the time. Part of me was thankful that she was there for my parents, but another part of me couldn't help but feel like I was being replaced, even though I knew that wasn't her intention. It wasn't long after that when my cousin got accepted into one of the top universities in the country. She had worked hard for it, and we were all proud of her. But then something happened that I didn't see coming. My parents offered to pay for her tuition. I didn't know how to react when I found out. I mean, they had been saving up for years to pay for my sister and me to go to college, but now all that money was going to my cousin. I remember overhearing the conversation one night when my cousin mentioned how she wasn't sure if she could afford the tuition. My parents, without even hesitating, offered to cover it for her. They said they had been saving for my sister's education, and since my sister was gone, they wanted to help her. My cousin was reluctant at first, but eventually she accepted. I didn't say anything at the time. I didn't know what to say. On the one hand, I understood why they wanted to help her. She had been there for them when they needed it most, and they felt like they owed her something. But on the other hand, it stung. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were giving away something that was supposed to be for me and my sister, something that should have been ours. After that, it felt like a shift had happened in our family dynamic. My cousin wasn't just a visitor anymore. She was practically part of the family. My parents treated her like she was their own daughter, and I was left standing on the sidelines, watching it all happen. So after my cousin accepted my parents' offer to pay for her tuition, everything kind of hit me all at once. At first, I didn't really know how to feel. Part of me tried to rationalize it, like, well, she's family. She was there for us, and maybe it's not that big of a deal. But then the other part of me, the part that was getting louder every day, just couldn't let it go. I mean, this was my sisters and my future that they had been saving for, right? And now it was gone, given away to someone who wasn't even their kid. What really stung was that no one had even asked me how I felt about it, like I wasn't part of the decision at all. It was just something that happened without a second thought, like I didn't even matter. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized how much my cousin had become this central figure in our family and how I had kind of faded into the background. My parents were constantly praising her for how well she was doing, for being accepted into such a prestigious school, and for everything she had done for them. And yeah, I get it. She was helpful, and she had been there for them when they were grieving. But it felt like all of that came at my expense. I started noticing little things that, honestly, I hadn't paid attention to before, like how whenever we had family dinners, my cousin was the one who got asked how school was going, how her classes were, what her plans were for the future. Me? I was lucky if I got asked how my day was. It was like I was just a side note in my own family. My parents had put all their energy into helping my cousin succeed, and I was left to fend for myself. It wasn't long before I started applying to colleges myself. I was always focused on getting into med school, and I had worked hard for it. I had good grades, solid extracurriculars, the whole deal. When I finally got my acceptance letters, I was thrilled. This was everything I had been working for, everything I had dreamed of. But then reality came crashing down. I sat down with my parents, expecting that we'd go over my options together, talk about the best fit for me, and figure out what came next. Instead, I was met with a look I hadn't seen from them before, one of pure guilt. That's when they told me they had already spent all the money they had saved for my education on my cousin's tuition. There was nothing left. I didn't even know what to say. I just sat there, staring at them, trying to process what they had just said. I kept waiting for them to say, "We'll figure something out," or "We'll help you in some other way," but that moment never came. Instead, they told me how proud they were of me for getting into med school but that they couldn't do anything to help me financially. All I could think about was how this wasn't supposed to happen. I had worked so hard for this, and now it felt like it was being taken away from me. And for what? Because they felt some sort of obligation to my cousin? Because they saw her as the daughter they had lost? It didn't make sense to me, and it hurt a lot. I left that conversation feeling more alone than ever. It wasn't just about the money. It was about everything leading up to that moment, the way my cousin had become their go-to for everything, the way I had been pushed to the side, and now the fact that my own future was being sacrificed because of it. It felt like I didn't matter to them anymore, like they had replaced me with her. I tried talking to my cousin about it, hoping maybe she would understand, but that didn't go the way I expected either. I wasn't trying to guilt her or anything. I just needed someone to talk to. But when I brought it up, she seemed almost surprised that I was upset. She said something along the lines of, "Well, your parents offered. I didn't force them." And yeah, she was right, but that didn't make it hurt any less. It was clear that she didn't feel bad about it, and that just made me feel even worse. It wasn't her fault, but she wasn't exactly sympathetic either. As the weeks went on, I couldn't shake this growing resentment I had toward my parents. I know they had been through a lot with my sister's death, and I tried to be understanding, but it was hard to see past how they had basically handed my future to someone else. I tried not to let it affect my relationship with them, but there were moments where I just couldn't help it. It was like every time they talked about how proud they were of my cousin, it was a reminder that I wasn't their priority anymore. Things got even more awkward when my cousin started talking about her university life, how she was loving her classes, making new friends, getting involved in all these activities. She was thriving, and every time she brought it up, my parents would light up with pride. Meanwhile, I was stuck figuring out how I was going to pay for school, how I was going to make my dreams happen without any help from the people who were supposed to be there for me. Eventually, I had no choice but to take out loans and start working to save up for school. It wasn't what I had planned, and it definitely wasn't what I wanted, but I didn't have any other options. The fact that I was having to go through all of this because of a decision my parents made without even considering how it would affect me, that stung. And it wasn't something I could just get over. There were days when I wanted to scream, days when I wanted to confront my parents and ask them why they didn't think about me when they made that decision. But I didn't. I just swallowed it down and focused on moving forward. I figured that if I could get through this, maybe one day it wouldn't hurt as much. The worst part? My parents acted like everything was fine, like nothing had changed. I think they genuinely believed that I'd be okay with it, that I'd just move on and accept that this was how things were now. But I couldn't, not completely anyway. Sure, I put on a brave face and did what I had to do, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been left behind, that I didn't matter as much as my cousin did. And honestly, that feeling never really went away. After that whole mess with my parents giving away my college fund, life became about survival for me. I mean, I still loved them, of course, but it was hard to shake off that lingering feeling of resentment. They'd made their choice, and I was left to pick up the pieces and figure out my own path. So I did what I had to do. I worked a lot. I started taking up jobs wherever I could find them, juggling between shifts at a local grocery store and tutoring kids at night. It wasn't glamorous, and it was exhausting, but it was what I needed to do if I wanted to get through school without sinking too deep into debt. The loans I took out were already weighing me down, and the thought of paying them off after graduation was terrifying, but I kept telling myself that this was the only way forward. I had no other choice. My cousin, meanwhile, was living her best life at her prestigious university. Every time she came home for holidays or weekends, she'd talk about all the exciting things she was doing, her classes, the new friends she made, the clubs she was involved in. My parents would sit there, hanging on to her every word, their faces lit up with pride. I can't even describe how hard it was to sit there and listen to it all, knowing that I was struggling just to keep my head above water while she was thriving, thanks to the money that was supposed to be mine. I tried not to let it get to me, but there were times when it was impossible not to. Like one weekend, she came home, and my parents threw this huge dinner for her, celebrating some award she had won at school. The whole evening was spent talking about how smart she was, how hard she worked, how proud they were of her. And I just sat there silently, stewing in my own frustration. Not once did they ask me how my own classes were going or how I was holding up with all the work I was doing to pay for them. It was like I didn't even exist in that moment. I guess part of me wanted to believe that eventually things would even out. Maybe once I graduated, once I made something of myself, they'd see that I was worth being proud of too. But that's the thing about resentment. It doesn't just go away because you want it to. It sticks, festering just under the surface, and no matter how much I tried to push it down, it was always there. One day, after an especially long shift at work, I came home to find my parents sitting in the living room with my cousin. They were all laughing about something, and I could hear my cousin talking about how she had just gotten an internship at some fancy law firm. Another thing for them to celebrate. I don't know what came over me, but in that moment, I couldn't hold it in any longer. I walked into the room and just blurted it out. "Do you guys even care how I'm doing?" The room went silent. My cousin looked at me like I had just slapped her across the face, and my parents, well, they just looked confused. My mom asked what I meant, and that's when it all came pouring out. I told them how hard it had been for me to work and go to school, how I felt completely ignored while they lavished all their attention on my cousin, how hurt I was that they had given away my future without even asking me how I felt about it. My dad tried to calm me down, saying something about how they thought I was strong enough to handle it and that they never meant to make me feel left out. But that wasn't the point, and I told them as much. It wasn't about being strong. It was about feeling like I mattered to them, like my future was important too. But instead, they had put all their focus on my cousin, and I was left to fend for myself. My cousin, to her credit, tried to apologize, but I wasn't in the mood to hear it. I didn't need her pity. What I needed was for my parents to understand how much they had hurt me. But instead, my mom just kept saying that they were sorry, that they never intended for things to turn out this way, and that they were proud of me too. It felt like a hollow apology, though, and I couldn't help but feel like it was too little too late. After that night, things were tense at home. My parents tried to make more of an effort with me, asking about school and work, but it all felt forced. I could tell they didn't really understand why I was so upset, and that made it even harder to move past it. I wanted to forgive them, but every time I thought I was ready to let it go, something would happen to remind me of what they had done. I remember one day I came home from class, completely exhausted, and found a letter from the financial aid office in my mailbox. I opened it up and saw that my loan payments were going to be even higher than I had expected. My stomach dropped. I knew I was already in deep, but seeing that number on paper, it made everything feel even more overwhelming. I sat on my bed for what felt like hours, just staring at that letter, wondering how I was going to get through this. And then, like clockwork, my cousin called to tell my parents about another scholarship she had won. Another reminder of how easy everything seemed to come for her while I was drowning in debt. I wanted to be happy for her. I really did. But all I could feel was bitterness. It wasn't fair, and no matter how much I tried to make peace with it, I couldn't. Eventually, I stopped going home as much. It was easier to just stay at school, where I didn't have to face the constant comparisons or the reminder of what I had lost. I threw myself into my studies, working harder than ever to make sure I didn't fall behind. I couldn't afford to fail, not with everything riding on this. But even though I was doing well academically, the weight of it all still hung over me, the loans, the work, the feeling of being overlooked by my own family. It was always there. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about feeling like I didn't matter, like I had been pushed to the side in favor of someone else. And no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, that feeling wouldn't go away. By the time I graduated, I was completely burned out. I should have been excited, proud of what I had accomplished, but all I felt was relief that it was over. I had made it through, but at what cost? The resentment was still there, buried deep, and I knew that things would never really be the same between me and my parents. Years passed after I graduated, and despite everything, I did my best to move on. I had built a decent life for myself, even though the road to get there had been tougher than it should have been. I worked hard, paid off some of my loans, and started to feel like I could put the past behind me. The resentment toward my parents was still there, but it wasn't as sharp anymore. I figured they did what they thought was best at the time, even if it left me feeling abandoned. I convinced myself that holding on to all that anger wasn't doing me any good. And for the most part, I kept my distance from my cousin. She had her life, I had mine, and I didn't see any point in keeping in touch beyond the occasional family event. Things had settled into a routine, and I was, in a way, content with where I'd ended up. Maybe not where I had imagined, but it was a stable life. Then, one day, out of nowhere, everything came crashing back. I was catching up with an old friend from high school, someone who knew both my cousin and me, and during our conversation, they casually mentioned something that stopped me in my tracks. Apparently, my cousin's parents had received a significant inheritance around the same time my parents gave her the money for college. At first, I didn't think much of it, but as my friend kept talking, it hit me like a ton of bricks. My cousin didn't need my parents' money. She had the means to pay for her entire education without taking a single dime from them. Her parents had never been struggling like she had led everyone believe. All that stress, all the sacrifices I had to make, all the hard work I put in to cover my tuition and expenses, it was all unnecessary. I couldn't believe it. I spent years feeling guilty for being mad at my parents, thinking they had just made a mistake, but in reality, my cousin had lied. She took the money my parents saved for me, knowing full well that her own parents could have covered everything. She let them think she needed the help when she didn't. I felt sick. All the years I had spent working myself to the bone, feeling abandoned and hurt, and she had been living it up, fully aware of the truth. My anger, which I thought I had buried, came rushing back full force. It wasn't just anger at her. It was anger at myself for letting this go on for so long without realizing something was off. I couldn't let it sit. I had to confront her. So I called her and told her we needed to talk. When we met up, I didn't waste time. I asked her straight up if it was true, if she knew her parents could have paid for her college and why she never told my parents about the inheritance. She didn't even try to deny it. She admitted that her parents had gotten the inheritance and that they had planned to use it to pay for her school. But when my parents offered, she saw an opportunity and took it. She actually said, they would have given me the money anyway. It's not like I forced them. They saw me as their replacement daughter after your sister passed, so why shouldn't I take it? She said it so casually, like it didn't even matter that she had completely screwed me over. Hearing her say that was the final straw. I couldn't believe how cold she was about it, how little she cared about what she had done. She didn't feel guilty at all. She had gotten what she wanted, and that was all that mattered to her. I had spent years working and sacrificing for an education that I should have had help with, all because she saw my parents' grief as an opening to benefit herself. I cut contact with her immediately. I didn't even give her the chance to justify it further. I was done. I didn't want anything to do with her, and honestly, I didn't even care what happened to her after that. But now I'm left with the question of what to do about my parents. I haven't told them the truth yet, and I don't know how to. They still think of her as the daughter who stepped in during a time of loss, and they're proud of the life she's built. Telling them the truth would shatter that image they have of her. And as much as I want to be angry with them for giving away my future without even considering me, I know this would devastate them. I've gone back and forth in my head, wondering if I should tell them at all. Part of me thinks they deserve to know, that they should understand what really happened and maybe even realize how much they let me down. But another part of me can't stand the thought of breaking their hearts again, especially after everything they went through with my sister. What hurts the most is knowing that all those years of hard work and sacrifice weren't even necessary. I could have had the education I wanted, the life I had dreamed of, if only my cousin hadn't been so selfish. Instead, I was left to struggle while she thrived, all because she saw an opportunity to take something that wasn't hers. And the worst part? She doesn't even care. I couldn't hold it in any longer. After finding out the truth about my cousin, the weight of it was too much. I had spent weeks trying to decide if I should tell my parents or just let it go, but every time I looked at them, the anger bubbled up. They needed to know. They had to know that their trust had been shattered, that the person they thought was like a second daughter had been using them. So one evening after dinner, I sat them down. My heart was racing, and I could barely keep it together, but I just said it. I told them everything, about the inheritance, how my cousin never needed their help, and how she had let them believe that she did. I watched as the realization slowly hit them, their faces shifting from confusion to disbelief, then to pure anger. My mom sat there, her hands trembling, while my dad stood up and paced around the room. They were furious. I'd never seen them so angry before, and part of me felt a strange relief. It was like, finally, they understood why I had been so upset all those years. It wasn't just about the money. It was the betrayal, the way my cousin had taken advantage of their grief and kindness. She lied to us all these years, my dad muttered, running his hands through his hair. He looked so defeated, and I hated seeing him like that. My mom just kept shaking her head, like she couldn't believe it. How could she do that? We trusted her. We treated her like family, my mom said, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked up at me, tears in her eyes. We were trying to help her, and she used us. I could see the hurt in their eyes, and honestly, it made me feel sick. This wasn't what I wanted. I didn't want to hurt them, but they needed to know the truth. They had been manipulated, just like I had been pushed aside. It was like ripping off a bandage, and all the pain underneath was out in the open now. But as the anger simmered, the reality of the situation set in. There was nothing we could do. The money was gone, and my cousin had already finished school, started her career, and moved on with her life. My parents could yell and scream all they wanted, but in the end, we were powerless to change anything. We can't get the money back, my dad finally said, his voice tight with frustration. There's nothing we can do. What's done is done. He looked at me with a kind of helplessness that made my chest ache. They had been tricked, and now we all had to live with the consequences. I was furious. I wanted to do something to make my cousin pay for what she'd done, but there really wasn't anything we could do, no legal action to take, no way to reverse what had already happened. The only thing left was to cut her off, to make sure she wasn't part of our lives anymore. It felt like such a weak solution for something that had caused so much damage, but what choice did we have? My mom, still in shock, said, "We can't let her back into our lives after this. She's not family anymore." And just like that, it was decided. My cousin, who had once been like a sister to me, was no longer part of the family. We weren't going to reach out, and if she tried to contact us, we'd ignore her. She had betrayed us in a way that couldn't be forgiven, and we all knew there was no going back. After that conversation, things were tense for a while. My parents struggled to process what had happened, and I couldn't help but feel guilty for being the one to break it to them. But at the same time, I knew it was the right thing to do. We couldn't keep living a lie, pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. My cousin had manipulated us, and now she was out of our lives for good. Cutting her off wasn't easy. I thought I'd feel relieved, but instead, there was this emptiness. Even though we weren't close anymore, there had always been that connection, that shared history, and now it was just gone. It wasn't like I missed her, but losing that bond, even a broken one, still hurt. My parents were the same way. They were mad, but they were grieving the loss of someone they had loved and trusted. In the weeks that followed, we settled into a new normal. My cousin never reached out to us, and we never reached out to her. It was like she had vanished from our lives. My parents tried to move on, focusing on the future and on me. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally getting the attention and support that had been missing for so long. But even though things started to feel more normal, the anger never really went away. I still found myself thinking about what could have been, if my cousin hadn't lied, if I had gotten the support I needed for school. Maybe things would have been different. Maybe I wouldn't have had to struggle as much, and maybe my relationship with my parents wouldn't have been so strained. Still, there's only so much you can do to change the past. We made our choice. Cutting her off was the only way to protect ourselves from further hurt. And even though it didn't fix everything, at least we had some closure. At least we weren't living in the dark anymore. In the end, all I can do is move forward. My cousin's gone, my parents and I are on better terms now, and life goes on. But the scars are still there, and they always will be. Trust, once broken, is hard to repair. And even though my cousin is out of the picture, the damage she did will always be a part of our story.